Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Let's start with a mind-bending question. The scientists say that all of your cells are continuously dying and are being reborn. Are you the same person that you were when you were a baby? Or are you a different person altogether now that all of your baby cells have died and have been reborn? Confusing, right? This is what is called a paradox, a contradictory statement that often seems to defy logic, but when you dig a little deeper, it turns out to be true. And while people are still arguing about the conclusion of this paradox, the ship of Theseus, I have found that most of the fundamental truths in life are actually paradoxes. And in this video, I am sharing 20 of the ones that I have found most interesting. Number 15 is actually a personal favorite. So if you also have some of these, make sure you leave them in the comments and we'll give them a thumbs up. And let's begin. Number 1, if you try not to think of something, that is the exact thing that you'll end up thinking about. We have all been there when we try to continuously get rid of a thought, but that is the thought that does not seem to leave our brain and we keep obsessing over it. Now, this phenomenon was actually discovered by David Wagner and it's called the white bear problem because he conducted an experiment where he told a group of people to not think about a white bear. And guess what? That's what they ended up thinking about. He found out that this happens because when we tell our brain to forget something, a part of the brain actually does forget it. But there's this other part that continuously keeps checking up on it to make sure that it has forgotten it, and as a result, we are not able to forget about it. Now, this paradox is partly the reason that so much of psychological research and meditation research is centered around figuring out a way to master or control our thoughts. And I found that the moment that you embrace your thoughts and learn to let it go a little bit, that is when you kind of stop obsessing about it. So counterintuitive. Number 2, the more you fail at something, the more likely you are to succeed at it. This, I believe, is a super logical paradox because you get good at something by doing it over and over again. But the reason for doing something over and over again is because you are not good at it in the first place, which means you're repeatedly failing at something and you do it repeatedly till you get good at it. And it's in doing that repetition, it's in failing again and again that you actually become good at something and therefore you succeed. It's a whole cycle. Number 3, the more afraid you are of failing, the more likely you are to fail. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy and it's in tandem with the previous paradox that we discussed, because if you're afraid of failing, that means you're afraid of trying. And if you're not going to try something, that means you'll never get good at it. And if you never get good at it, the chances of you succeeding at it become marginally lower. Number 4, the more something scares you, the more you should probably do it. With the exception of stupidly dangerous things like jumping out of a moving car or giving a baby a gun, most of our fundamentally important decisions in life are scary. Choosing to get married, choosing to switch careers, choosing to move out of your hometown and live in another city. All of these are scary because these have the most amount of impact on our sense of self, on our self-identity. And because they have such a huge impact on our identity, the stakes here are really high. And whenever the stakes are high, we as humans tend to get nervous. But this nervousness is actually a sign or a good sign of when you should try to do something, especially if you know that something is good for you and you are afraid or nervous to do it because it's the change that you're scared of. You should go ahead and take that step. Number 5, you cannot hurt someone that you don't love. If you remember, Radhika Apte had this dialogue in Lust Stories, and there are so many Instagram clippings of it, this one. And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this paradox because on the one end, it is fundamentally true. Human beings are social creatures. We require intimacy, we require social connection in order to be able to thrive. But when we have intimate relationships, because we are also individualistic creatures, we are selfish by nature, we tend to put our own needs above the needs of others, and that causes friction, and that is inevitably bound to hurt someone. On the other hand, if you look at your interaction with a stranger, there are very few chances that you will ever get hurt by a stranger the way that you get hurt by a loved one, a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a family member. And this is the reason that a lot of people hold back in relationships, hold back in terms of opening themselves up to newer relationships because they are afraid of getting hurt. And this is also the reason why so much of toxicity in relationships is normalized, because we feel that toxicity is a part of the whole love relationships gambit. But another way to look at it is that while reciprocal harm may be inevitable in one sense of the word, the nature and the capacity of that reciprocal harm is something that is in our control. And that's where the nuance lies, my friend. That is why it's so important to build a strong sense of self so that you know where your boundary lies, where the other person's boundaries lie, and together you can create stronger boundaries. Number 6, the more connected we become with the world, the more isolated we tend to feel. Now, this is such a fascinating paradox because the marvels of technology have made it possible for us, for one individual, to connect to thousands, even millions of people. But this by nature means that when we are connected with so many people, the significance of individual impact, the significance of our impact as an individual becomes much lower. So if you look back on your grandparents' lives or your parents' life even, we realize that a lot of us lived in very tight-knit communities back then. This meant that individual actions impacted everybody in the community, and together you could also drive change. But now with the world becoming so interconnected, there are thousands of conversations happening about hundreds of issues online at any given point in time. And this tends to make us feel insignificant because we don't know where we stand in the world and whether our actions have the impact we intend for them to have or not. It's an unsettling feeling. Number 7, the way you treat yourself is the way you treat others, and vice versa. Generally speaking, the health of our relationships is a reflection of our own relationship with ourselves and vice versa. So if you have a strong sense of self, if you are kind with yourself, if you are empathetic towards yourself, if you trust yourself, those are qualities that will reflect in your relationships as well. On the other hand, if you have toxic relationships, you have controlling relationships, you have a lot of negativity surrounding your relationships, those are a reflection of your inner relationship with yourself. I actually really like this paradox as a tool for self-reflection because sometimes understanding what is going on inside of ourselves is difficult, and when we look at our interactions with the people around us, that can be a good marker to judge whether our internal dialogue, whether our internal perception is solid or not. If it's not, we can always take steps, talk to a therapist, coach, and drive in that direction so that we can improve our sense of self and therefore our relationships. And that's great. Number 8, the more you try to get people to like you, the less they actually like you. And a lot of it, I believe, happens because humans fundamentally value authenticity and honesty in communication and in relationships. Now, when you try too hard to get somebody like you, your actions are a form of manipulation because you are working with the intent of doing things so that other people will like you and not because you fundamentally do them or that is the natural course of action for you. And that entire premise makes it inauthentic. And those are cues that people pick up on through your body language, through the way that you speak, through the way that you conduct yourself around them. And because they pick up on it, it is extremely annoying when somebody tries too hard to get liked. It's annoying, it's irritating, and people don't end up liking you as much. Number 9, the more honest you are about your faults, the more people will think you're perfect. Now, we see this time and again with public figures, with motivational figures. The more that they are vulnerable in front of larger audiences, the more they come out and talk about their flaws or their problems or their shortcomings, the more people seem to put them on a pedestal. And this is because as humans, we value vulnerability a lot. And when somebody is being vulnerable, they appear courageous because it takes courage to be vulnerable. And another reason why this paradox, I think, works is because it helps people to feel connected with their own sense of self. When somebody's talking about their flaws on a huge stage, it gives people a chance to feel validated about their own flaws and shortcomings without feeling ashamed of them. Number 10. The more you dislike a trait in someone else, the more likely you are avoiding it in yourself. As kids, I remember we used to say, "Jo kehta hai, wahi hota hai." And I think this statement is so fundamentally true because we tend to project ourselves onto the world. This is something that Freud also called projection. So for example, if a person is insecure, they will think that everybody around them is insecure as well. Or if a person is a liar, they will not be able to trust anyone around them as well because they think everybody else is a liar too. This happens because, like I said, we tend to project our inner selves onto the world. We view the world through our inner lens. This means that we have a bias towards thinking that other people are also experiencing the world like we are experiencing the world. And again, I think this is a great tool of self-reflection because the next time somebody is bothering you, somebody's trait or a behavior in them is bothering you, it might be a good idea to stop and think why it's bothering you in the first place. And if you have watched this video so far, you need to know a fundamental truth about YouTube as well. The more you like a video, the better it performs on YouTube. So go ahead, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and let's get on to point number 11. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. If you go and talk to an expert in any field and if you ask them questions, you will realize that they hardly ever give you a straightforward or a very clear or logical answer to your question. And this happens because the more you know about a subject, the more your knowledge also increases about the inconsistencies in that subject or the gaps or the unanswered questions that that subject has. It is basically like your horizon expanding. So when you're a kid, your immediate environment is your horizon. So if you don't know something, you understand that all of it exists within this immediate environment. But as you grow older and your horizon expands, you realize that you can't even know everything about things that are in your line of sight. And when you start to think about things that are outside your line of sight, it is just mind-boggling altogether. Number 12. The more someone thinks they're right, the more likely they're wrong. This is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect in psychology, which means that the less expertise somebody has on a subject, the more confident they are talking about it. And the more expertise they have on a subject, the less confident or the less sure of themselves they are while talking about it. You must have heard that quote by Bertrand Russell. The problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are so certain of themselves and wise people are so full of doubts. Well, that's the side effect of wisdom, my friend. Number 13, the more you try to argue with someone, the less likely you are to convince them of your perspective. The reason for this is that most arguments, unless it's a structured debate, are emotional in nature, which is why you can't try to solve them with objective truth or with logic. You have to approach it as an emotional turmoil case. Because when you are arguing with someone, you are not just attacking their worldview, you're also attacking their sense of self because they associate it with their worldview. If you actually want a real debate, the only way for that to happen is if the two people involved put their egos aside, put their emotions aside, and only deal with data. Number 14, it is easier to give advice, but it's very difficult to follow your own advice. Now, this is called the Solomon's Paradox, and it's named after a Jewish king, Solomon, who apparently gave really killer advice, so much so that people from all across the globe came to his counsel. But when it came to applying this advice in his own life, he was really bad at it. In fact, he made really bad decisions, he committed numerous sins, and as a result, his empire fell and ultimately led to his demise. This paradox is literally everywhere. We see this so much with people in my profession, in the field of coaching or life coaching, or in psychology or psychiatry. Wherever people are giving advice to other people, these are not mistakeless creatures. I make mistakes, psychologists make mistakes, doctors make mistakes, right? But the advice that they give helps other people. So I think this paradox is a good reminder that we should listen to our own advice from time to time. Number 15, and this is a personal favorite. The harder you try to achieve something, the harder it feels to achieve. When we expect something to be difficult, we subconsciously end up making it even more difficult for ourselves. I'll give you an example. When I was wanting to start this YouTube channel, I was so overwhelmed by all of the stuff that you have to do, like scripting and shooting and editing. And it seemed really hard at that point in time. And so I got down and I started researching everything I could about making a YouTube video. And the more I researched, the more difficult it became because 10 more steps got added with each video. And now I realize that the idea that I make a video on is 90% of the work done. Because it felt hard to begin with, I actually proceeded to make it harder for myself. Number 16, the more available something is, the less you tend to want it. As humans, we have a very strong scarcity bias. And I think this is one of the reasons that relationships in olden days, when soldiers used to go to war, worked out so beautifully because people did not get to spend a lot of time together. So they valued that time so much. And that's true for everything that is scarce in our lives, including gold and diamond and oil. Air is not a scarce resource right now, and that is why we don't value it as much. But the applications of scarcity bias, I think, are very, very vast and also very nuanced, and we could actually make a whole separate video on that. So let me know if that is something that you want. And also, reminder, part 2 of the attraction video is coming soon. Number 17, the more choices you have, the less satisfied you are with each one. This is the good old paradox of choice, in tandem with the one that we just spoke about. Researchers have found that when we have a lot more things or options to choose from, we become less satisfied with each particular option because the opportunity cost here is much higher. For example, if you have just 3 options on the menu to choose from, you choose one dish and you're satisfied because you're only giving up on 2 other dishes. But if you have to make a choice from 400 options on a menu, you're potentially giving up on 399 other options. And that just makes it a lot harder and a lot less satisfying to choose just one option. The workaround for this actually has been minimalism, which a lot of people have been following, where they eliminate the concept of choosing altogether. So can't choose from what clothes to wear, eliminate that choice altogether and just wear one type of clothing. Can't choose what meal to have for breakfast, lunch and dinner, eliminate that choice altogether and just have one meal for each. Number 18, the more you try to force relationships, the less likely they are to work. And this stands true for all kinds of relationships, including interpersonal ones, including your love life or your relationship with your family or friends, even with co-workers. Because relationships are fundamentally based on feelings, and you can't force somebody to feel a certain way about you. You can't force somebody to like you or to trust you or to love you. Because the more you try to force somebody to feel a certain way, the more likely they are to start feeling the opposite of that. And I'm sure that you've experienced this as well. The more you try to get rid of anxiety, the more anxious you feel. The more you try to stop obsessing over someone, the more you keep obsessing over them. When you're trying to force somebody to do something in a relationship, you're trying to force them to feel a certain way. And when a feeling is forced, it loses all meaning. For instance, if you have to force your boyfriend to spend time with you every weekend and it becomes an obligation for him, it loses meaning. Number 19. The more you run after happiness, the less happy you are. This is known as the paradox of hedonism. And people ask me all the time, how to be happy or how to be happy all the time. The fact that you are chasing happiness as an end goal is where the problem lies. This actually ties in with the first point that we discussed in the video, that you tend to fixate on the very problem that you're trying to avoid. So when you're chasing happiness, you are actually fixating on avoiding sadness or avoiding the problem that is causing you to be unhappy. And because of that, you end up fixating on that problem more and more. That's why you'll find that when you practice being more present or being just in the moment and not thinking about the past or the future, that is when happiness tends to automatically come to you. And this is a fundamental mistake that I see a lot of people make on their manifestation journeys as well. Because when they're trying to manifest something, it's a problem that they're trying to run away from. And as a result, they end up just fixating on the problem at hand. And number 20, change is the only constant. And I absolutely love this one, despite the fact that it is cheesy or corny AF. And that is because it is a profound statement, and at the same time, it is a very simple concept. Throughout our lives, we just keep running away from change, and we do this like we discussed before because whenever change is happening or whenever any major change is happening, it tends to conflict with our sense of self. It tends to force us to break out of our shell and to evolve that sense of self that we've become comfortable with. And that is why we tend to dislike change. But like the paradox goes, the world is going to continue to change. Things are going to continue to change. Nothing stays constant. And that is why the earlier we make our peace with it, the better we become at adapting to change. We may never be completely okay with it, but we get better at adapting with it. And those were our 20. If you have any more of these, make sure you leave them in the comments because I would love to read them or have a discussion on them. And make sure you check out these 2 videos next if you like lists. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay, bye!